Hey everyone, welcome to this latest and actually the last interview episode 2025. We did say it was Magnetic Skies, but fortunate for us, Mr. Jake Shillingford from My Life Story agreed to come and talk to us, so we had to get him on because he's a fantastic hero of Mark and mine. It was great to have him on, mate, wasn't it?
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, sometimes opportunities land in your lap. We've been speaking to Jake for a while. He's got the re-release or the reissue of Joined Up Talking, the brilliant My Life Story album coming out in November, later in November. We've spoken to Jake before. We know he's a great raconteur, great stories, a really fun person. So we're absolutely thrilled to get him on the Electronic Cafe and everyone can hear the stories themselves.
Yeah, mate, you think about it, just quick sort of pulse reflection, because this is our last interview ever. So what a year we've had for interviews. Like Newman, Fox, Wolfgang back with Pete, the gal. I mean, the guys from Actors. I mean, we could get Rusty, Jake. It's just been a fantastic year for us, hasn't it?
Oh, it's been unbelievable. We're two lucky boys and we're blessed that these people come on and just such great fun and want to talk to us.
Yeah, definitely. Shall we show everyone the amazing conversation we just had with Jake?
Yeah, everybody, Jake Shillingford from My Life Story on the Electronic Cafe. Enjoy.
The 5th. Oh, that could be the day of the gig.
It's my birthday as well.
Why didn't you put it on your birthday?
Best birthday present you're going to get.
Look at that face.
She removed your name from the speed dialer screen, and now you don't exist, yeah, 'cause it's a girl thing. In her arms or in her clutches, you never know just what she thinks, 'cause it's a girl thing. Na 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 na, it's a girl thing. It's a girl thing. It's a girl thing.
So, hey everyone, welcome to this awesome interview episode of Electronic Cafe. We've been keen to get this awesome artist on the show for a while, and so we're so glad he's here right now. Jake Shillingford, welcome to Electronic Cafe, mate. It's so great to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Hello, Andrew. Hello, Mark. Lovely to be here on such a beautiful, warm, sunny morning.
It is, isn't it? It's incredible.
Thanks, Jake. Jake, I'm going to wear my heart on my sleeve straight off the bat. I mean, we're here to talk about Joined Up Talking, which is being released on the 28th of November this year for the first time on vinyl, which is brilliant. But before we do that, My Life Story for us, I was a massive fan of My Life Story. I mean, what you were doing in the middle of all that Britpop storm and everything was something totally different. The orchestration, the theatre of it all, it was fantastic. So I just want to get out there before it burns away too much at me that we were massive fans. And your music career, I mean, obviously it's quite a story. How did it all begin? How did you go into music?
So I'm the son of two artists, and my father was a printmaker. My mother was a fine artist, and they met through those circles in the 1950s. And then when they moved from London to Southend-on-Sea, where I was born, they basically became permanent fixtures at Southend College of Art. And throughout a couple of decades, as I was growing up and as a young child, you had Ian Jury, who worked as a technician, Bob Fish from Darts, who I was a big fan of, who were kind of like I know this is going to sound weird, but almost a prototype to My Life Story with the size of the band.
Yeah.
Bob was a technician. Alison Moyer babysat for me famously, who was also a student there. Dave Garn, obviously from Depeche Mode. My father taught him. So I grew up being babysat and sort of being completely exposed to punk and the new wave scene as if it was a completely normal thing. And I think that just music felt like the better escape for me than art. I was under a bit of pressure. My brother went on to become an artist, but I think I just felt the pressure as an older son to sort of carry the mantle and continue in art. In fact, I did actually end up going to art school, and both my parents were still there as lecturers. And I just found that a little bit awkward, only in that I think a lot was expected of me. So so I think that when I look back, I think that was the sort of driver to get into music. But obviously, there was an incredible amount of passion, and music for me was a way of. I was incredibly shy as a young teenager, so music was a great way of getting my voice across.
Standing on a coal mine, I could make it all mine, but I don't want your money, just yours. If you took my hand, would it still be blind? 'Cause you don't sparkle, you don't shine, sparkle in mine.
You guys formed in '84, Jake, but I think it was like the mid '90s when your star started really rising. My thoughts on that were, what took everyone so long to realise how bloody good you were?
I think it was more the other way round. So My Life Story from Southend we were a group of four young teenagers, mixture of school friends and sort of local musicians, and we're only a four-piece. The sort of grand idea of My Life Story being a kind of this orchestral, almost alternative orchestral band, a sort of not like ABC, where it's very, not that, I mean, I love ABC, but the idea was I wanted to do something that was a bit more, had a bit more of a sort of ramshackle sort of nature about it. That idea didn't really come until I moved to London, and I got this incredible job working at Dingwall's, the venue in Camden Town. I was very fortunate in that I was designing a lot of their posters and flyers. They gave me my own club night on a Monday night called the Panic Station, and I started booking some pretty amazing bands along with my friend Simon Benny. We booked the Stone Roses early shows, we booked the Wonder Stuff, and I became friends with Miles from about 1987 onwards. So he was doing his first shows with the Wonder Stuff down at Dingwall's. I was just so exposed to the sort of late 80s indie scene and the dance scene that emerged out of that. And I just thought, I'm going to do something that is absolutely, completely against anything that's on top of the pops that I'm seeing every night at Dingwall's or in Camden at the Electric Ballroom or the Camden Palace. And so the idea of this sort of orchestral indie band sort of struck me, but that wasn't until I'd say about 1989, 1990 was when I came up with the idea. So the long way of answering your question was the marriage between a musically educated person like me and the sort of drummer, keyboard player, that sort of, no guitarist, but that sort of those sort of people that have trodden the boards, that haven't had a sort of conservatoire music education, and then me going up to people that were holding violins, walking down the street, people that were on the London Underground, which was a big theme of our first album, Mornington Crescent, purely because I'd met all these people on different tube lines, and I would go up to people, up to classical musicians, and ask them if they wanted to cross the River Styx and join the sort of, go over to the dark side. And surprisingly, there were lots of people that were really interested in doing that. So there was a process of getting the right people in and auditioning, me learning about how an orchestral element would integrate in with a live band. And also remember, we're playing venues that are, our first ever gig was at the Rosemary branch, which is is basically a pub. I mean, there's nothing more to say. It's not even an upstairs room at a pub. So, we were playing, 50 capacity venues with an 11-piece band. So we're essentially a fifth of the size of the venues on stage. And it took 10 years to just marry all of those things together and frankly, we were quite shit. We had so much goodwill, I think, from people, and people could just say, well, you don't, Nirvana are playing Glastonbury next week, playing Reading next week, Jake. Your band doesn't really fit in on that bill. You're not going to really get on top of the pops next to, Candy Flip doing a sort of rave version of Strawberry Fields. This isn't working, is it? And I was like, well, just bear with me. It'll come out in the wash somehow. And of course, lo and behold, we were sort of armed and ready when those bands like Suede, and maybe not so much Suede, but more like Pulp and Blur, when they started to emerge, we were all ready to get out there, and of course we started supporting those bands, and that's kind of how we got that sort of lift off. Yeah.
What story? Brilliant.
She's selling fascination, sensation in her empire line, sells emaciation.
So you guys are actually playing Dingwalls on the 5th of December, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's quite an emotional homecoming for me, that, because although the orientation of Dingwalls has changed, many people might not be aware, but Dingwalls was actually 45 degrees the other way. So it actually ran against the river as opposed to alongside the lock. So when I'm on stage, it's not like I can see all the things that I used to see when I was there, but it is different. But the smell of the place, smells never change. And when I worked there designing their posters and flyers between 87 and 91, I was sitting with an easel, an Electroset, typesetting sheets, and a rotring board, and I would actually sit. My day job was sitting in the club all day while they were cleaning, beer and sick around, genuinely up around me. There's a genuine true story. The day after St. Patrick's night, and Camden in those days was full of Irish immigrants, people that for decades, generations that had lived in Camden. So Patrick's night in Camden used to be a huge event, and I was in there the day after, and at about midday, I heard a noise, and someone had been there sleeping. They'd missed him. They turfed the club out, and there was a gentleman that was asleep, sort of in the farthest corner you could imagine of the venue. Yeah, it scared the life out of me.
Going back to your history, your actual first single was Home Sweet Zoo in '86. And I guess your first proper My Life Story single as we know it was Girl A, Girl B, Boy C off of Mornington Crescent, which was produced by Giles Martin of all people. I mean, how did that happen with Giles Martin? That's quite an esteemed name to have on that song.
Yeah, and just to bear in mind that, Giles was, I would say, in his early 20s at this point. I was in my mid 20s. I mean, it's quite an extraordinary story, and just to sort of add a caveat to that, I think one of the things that's happened to me in my sort of career and life is that there's probably been about 6 or 7 incredibly crazy things that have happened, the coincidental things that are just impossible to explain. For example, I was the singer of the Specials for a short while. I discovered Adele. There's loads of things that people don't know about me that genuinely happened, and I don't really talk about it a lot. I mean, when I say I discovered Adele, I was the first to record her when she was a young girl. She was only 11. But the story with Giles Martin is quite extraordinary in that we were doing a gig at the Marquee, And I think this was around 92. So not a lot happening really. That strange time where, you know, there was not really a scene as such. Yeah. And so Giles Martin, son of George Martin, had gone to the show, must have heard, you know, that we were an indie band with strings. Obviously, you know, there'd been no heat on us in terms of the press or anything. We were just another band playing another show in London. Anyway, he came up to me, introduced himself as Giles Martin. I didn't put two and two together. Why would you? You know, he didn't say, like, I just need to explain to you that, you know, I'm the son of, you know, the most famous record producer in the world. He's got a fairly ordinary name. So anyway, he said to me, look, I should have got it on this next clue, but he goes, I get free demo time at my dad's studio. Do you want to do some free recording? And I was like, well, this is great. You know, you'll take anything. You know, this is a posh kid whose dad's, you know, got a few bit of gear. We could take fully advantage of this. You know, so no strings attached. You know, I just really like your band. Great, brilliant. This is good. We need a demo. So I said, whereabouts is your dad's place? He said, well, it's a bit ramshackle at the moment. It's just being built. And I was like, all right, yeah, here we go. You know, it would be like a little Porter studio thing in, you know, the corner of somebody's flat in Finsbury Park, you know. And he said it's in Belsize Park. And now I said, well, that's incredible, because I said I live in a bedsit in Belsize Park. Those people that don't know London too well on this podcast, it's 2 tube stops up from Camden, up the hill towards Hampstead. So it's actually quite a nice area. As you move out of Camden, you go due north. And I said, well, that's amazing. So he said, well, look, this is great. You know, here's the address. Come and meet me. I'll introduce you to my dad. Here's the address. And I was like, 74 Haverstock Hill. I said, well, that's literally, I mean, it's not even a minute. It's 30 seconds from where I live, right? So I said, I'll see you on Monday, 9:00 Monday. So I was told the band, we were all excited. I said, well, I'll go see what this place is like. So I walked up the hill, and I literally know the place. You know, there's Budgeons, there's the post office. Right, where's 74? And I was like, well, there's no, I'm looking for a doorway. There's no, have I got the wrong, I'm looking at the piece of paper. Has he written the number down right? I said, well, the next logical building is the deconsecrated church, which I said, well, it can't be that massive deconsecrated church. So I thought, well, look, it's got building works out here. I'll go and ask them if they know this address. So I walk in, and I walk up, and there's a lady at reception, and I thought, well, I'll ask this lady if she's heard of a studio or heard of anything around here. And I walk up to her, and leaning over her was Sir George Martin. And I don't know if you've ever seen The Usual Suspects, where at the very end, all of the sort of, you know, he suddenly realizes all the pieces that, you know, have come into place, you know, have all sort of emerged into his mind. I nearly sort of dropped to my knees. It was incredible. So I was like, "Oh my God, you know, we're in the inner sanctum. Where this is, you know, this is history, you know." And what it was George Martin was Abbey Road was still going, but he had Air Studios, which was in Oxford Street. I think he'd sold that location where many famous bands had recorded. Yeah. I think Queen and that sort of era, that sort of 70s era, and was rebuilding and relocating to Belsize Park. And we were actually the first ever band to record there while they were still building it. And that was, they were the tracks that went on to form the part of the first single, Girl A, Girl B, Boy C.
He couldn't have sent you to the Montserrat Air Studios, could he?
Yeah, he could have done, yeah.
Mate, in terms of inspirations, I mean, you mentioned some people when you were at college now, but who are the musicians or artists that made you sit up and go, I want a piece of this?
Well, I think sometimes it surprises people. So, I mean, as I said earlier, my sort of formative years were informed by the sort of post-punk era, really. Yeah. So the bands that I genuinely love are Bunnyman, Teardrops, Liverpool, you know, the Pale Fountains, that whole thing. So there's no question that all of that Liverpool scene, War as well.
Yeah.
They all used orchestration. You know, the Teardrops used brass, Bunnyman used strings. The Pale Fountains, who are a highly underrated band, used a load of Bacharach style orchestration. They even had a top 40 hit with Thank You. They went on to become Shack, who obviously were a big part of that sort of Britpop scene. So the Liverpool bands, I think, first, and particularly I think Julian Cope's solo career afterwards, I thought was really interesting. I've always been into psychedelia.
Yeah.
I loved there was a really weird scene in the 80s weirdly enough at the same time as the new romantic movement, which was a new psychedelic scene, and it's not well documented, but there was an album that came out called A Splash of Colour, which I think was in about 82, which really influenced me. And I used to go to psychedelic nights. There was a night in Southend that I went to when I was like 16 called the Taste Experience at Play. Well, Doctor and the Medics came from Southend and that area, and they had a number one around that time, and they were from that sort of psychedelic scene. So psychedelia, I mean, my favorite album, you know, is Love, you know, Forever Changes. That's my actual favorite album of all time. I can still listen to that and hear. I love albums. The reason why I like psychedelia is because there's always something you can hear in it every time you play it. Even if you played it 1,000 times, there'll be a little bell or something, you know,
it's a
you've
good
heard before. So psychedelia, that sort of post-punk stuff, they were the sort of main influences. So it wasn't really so much the sort of polished sort of stuff. You know, I mean, obviously I grew up with, you know, the sort of the John Barry scores, you know, in you know, Michael Caine films and Bond films and all of that. So it was more really, I suppose a 60s English, or 60s, 70s and 80s English or British view of orchestration. And I think the orchestration on psychedelic records is really crazy and out there as well. So when I used to speak to the string section about so I would do arrangements in my head. So I would do string arrangements where I would sort of stand in front of our string quartet and sort of just hum ideas and go, can it go like this? And they're like, well, it shouldn't really go like that, but we'll humor you, you know. So my orchestrations were always a little bit wonky, that would go sometimes musically incorrectly and sometimes jar. And then obviously there are other very, very talented. I mean, that's the thing I've done in my whole life. My sort of my sort of rule of life, my kind of my manifesto really is to surround myself with people that are cleverer than I am. So I you know, I was very lucky that I had great people around me that could help arrange, you know, those string parts and make them work with an indie ethos.
She's a cotton strip, but no one's cutted her in yet. She'll cut up your wardrobe and damn your eyes, and if you can't live without her, then why aren't you dead yet? Can't say something, will say nothing.
Just going back to your band, because obviously you said you're quite unique, massive sort of size, 11-piece band.
Yeah.
Am I right remembering that I think by the third album you went back to 4 people? Was that?
Yeah, I mean, we probably didn't handle the sort of comms on that too well. We didn't really go back to 4 people. It was more of so the album you're talking about is Joined Up Talking, which we're going to be playing in December on a tour. But it was more of a political thing with the record label in that we signed a massive record deal, you know, after working with Giles Martin, and then moving, you know, we moved into a situation where in order for My Life Street ever to work, we needed proper major label capital behind the band. So us and our manager Adrian Boss, we just said, look, we're going to go all or nothing. I mean, this was incredible. I mean, only a young person would do this, but it was basically, we announced that we were going to either sign to a major label or we would split up. That was genuinely what we put out there. on flyers. We made on fanzines. We just said we did this thing called A Month of Sundays, which funny enough is also at Dingwalls. And lo and behold, by the end of it, we got signed to Parlophone. So Parlophone at that time had Radiohead, Supergrass, Blur. There'll be a few other pretty big ones on there as well. Anyway, it was sort of the biggest label at the time. So we signed for a big fee. So that was always the problem in a way, is that we had to, we had 11 people that had to be paid. We were completely uncompromising. The label would say, you go to Greece and do a big tour in Greece or whatever, and we'd say, well, we're only going with the full lineup. I'm not going to go out there with an acoustic guitar. It's all or nothing. And actually, I'm quite proud of the way that we kind of carried ourselves in that, because, as you said at the top of this show, the people remember what that band was like and how viscerally exciting it was, with 11 people going completely insane on stage. Those memories will be with us forever. We were at all those gigs. And so, we were uncompromising. When it came down to Join Up Talking, it was just like we changed label. We were signed to a really bizarre label the label wasn't bizarre, but it was a bizarre situation in that we signed to Andrew. So another Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber set up an indie label. It's a beautiful story where I caught him at we got invited to a Cats video. Cats was put on video, and it was a launch party, and everyone was there. And I sort of sidled up to him and I said, Andrew, thanks very much for, setting up this label. And his first two signings were us and Marianne Faithfull. And I was, blown away by that. Hanging out with Marianne Faithfull was about a high point of a lifetime, as you can imagine. Yeah. I spent a bit of time with her. I said, why an indie label? Such an odd thing, if you don't mind me asking. Why would you set up something that an alternative record label? And he said, it was either an indie label or Action Man the musical. And I was like, oh my God. He goes, well, just think about it, Jake. Tie it in with Mattel,
And you won.
We won, yeah. But I think, we won, but he probably should have gone with his gut, I think, and had bronzed, half-naked men roller skating around the Palace Theatre.
Across the fault lines, whoa. But we got Tinseltown, whoa, whoa. While other cities drown. 'Cause it's you and I, those are ringing it, never doubted why. 'Cause we're killing it now, we'll never stop taking on the world.
So Jake, when My Life Story hit their peak in mid-late 90s, it was at the height of Britpop. There's Blur, Oasis, all that stuff was going on. And I guess it was a bit like the Wild West in the music industry at the time. The competition for your band, most bands at that time, to get a break, be it on, in the charts or on magazines and everything. How competitive was it? It must have been mad.
Yeah, I always look at two sides of it, really. I think, and I have spoken to other bands of the era about this, and there tends to be a general consensus, which is, on the one hand, genuinely nobody, even some of the more commercial Britpop bands, really didn't think when they started that they would be a multi-platinum or whatever continually, or you just didn't, because you were brought up on, seeing, the biggest bands of that late 80s era was, maybe catching Primal Scream play at the Hammersmith Palais. These weren't huge acts, and then actually in the sort of post-Smith scene, which we were all, I think the thing that kind of links all those Britpop bands is, I followed the Smiths around when I was 17, 18 years old. I must have seen them, 5 or 6 times, so all of us are sort of influenced by that sort of mid to late 80s stuff. And of course, there's all of those bands, that indie scene, the C86 scene. There was no pretense, really. There was no one expected of those bands to or bands like Orange Juice, who I absolutely adore. You never really got a sense of ambition with a lot of those groups. I mean, I'm not citing Orange Juice as a band in particular whatsoever, but the sort of shoegaze era and the sort of that stuff, the jangly pop era. So I think we had sort of similar kind of ambitions in that, we were just pleased to be doing it. There was definitely an aspect of that. I'm not going to lie to you, I wouldn't spend 8-9 years working really hard to create an orchestral pop band if I didn't want it to be a success. And I think in that way, I think that we are indicative of the era, which is a screaming look at me, And I mean, you probably need to speak to my therapist about why that happened. But there were a lot of bands that were doing that, and you're absolutely right, Mark. I think that there came a point where you had a lot of personalities that were all screaming to be heard, and then they all got signed. And so there's my sort of take on it. The reality of it, it was difficult because I just was not prepared, I don't think, to be in a situation where it was like back at school, and there was bullying going on. There was, people were being excluded. People were ignoring each other. I'm the sort of person that would walk into a pub or whatever and go, there's so-and-so over there. Oh, hello, how are you doing? So I'm not going to tell you the person's name, but there was a famous Britpop person who I was at a Q Awards, and it was a free bar, and this person was in front of me who I knew reasonably well, met many times, and they'd got, it was packed, and it was just free. And I said, "Oh, do you mind just getting asking them just for 2 more glasses of wine or beer or whatever while you're getting the free ones in?" And he just, he said no, just.
Oh my God.
So I mean, that when it comes down to beer and drinking, there's an etiquette there where you've gone too far.
Suited and booted, run a flick come through my hair, and if you don't speak the word on the street, no one there. All dressed up and I'm in my prime. All dressed up and I wear what I'm soon to be seen.
But so I think that things like that really shocked me, actually, and because I think that we cited a few 80s bands in this conversation, and of the 80s pop stars that I've met, and I'm a fan of so many 80s acts, and thankfully met a lot of my heroes from that era. They've always been incredibly gracious, and I can't tell you, there isn't one person I've met that would behave in a competitive way. That decade, I think, people were really wanted to help each other. So I was incredibly, I was sort of upset and sort of a bit bowled over by it, but also, I appreciate that, when you saw My Life Story perform, and the sort of, we would support bands, and there's 11 of us, right? There's half of us are girls. We've got Parlophone Records have paid for Versace dresses for some of these girls. There's hairspray everywhere. There's violin. There's people are tuning up. I mean, these really big bands that we were supporting must have just hated us because we were taking up the entire backstage area. It must have caused a lot of consternation. So I don't blame people for feeling a little bit threatened by My Life Story.
I burn myself out of watching you from afar. More a comet than a star. Now my mind is run away. I made her up today. I don't believe in love when I'm not in love, when I am.
And Jake, we said, well, I said before we started filming this, I mean, we love My Life Story. I mean, I've personally been a massive My Life Story fan since Mornington Crescent, and I've seen you guys live a number of times. Again, when you had the full 12 piece, I saw those shows. Your songwriting has always fascinated me in the sensibility of like pop, theatre. It was in the Britpop scene, his orchestrations, it was all quite grand. The pathos and the melancholy in some of the songs, the way you twist the words around. I mean, how do you catch those ideas? There's some brilliant songs amongst all of that.
Yeah, thanks. That's very kind of you. Thanks very much. Well, you know, you're onto my favorite subject here, because although we've talked about a lot of kind of imagery and sound, to me, underneath all of that pathos and all of the sort of grand design, to me, a song is still the beating heart of anything. You know, without a great song, you literally have nothing. And so sort of quietly in the background, I really practice that as a craft, I think. I mean, I do have mild, you know, I mean, not that I was ever diagnosed, but I've, you know, you can imagine I've got a little bit of everything, you know, anything that's an acronym. I've got a little bit of all of those things, but not enough to, you know, to put me in sort of any kind of like, you know, unfortunate situation where I need sort of desperate help. But I've always been a bit, I think the Beatles often talked about Ringo in this way, that he would have these Ringoisms, and he was famous for coming up with things like Hard Day's Night and sort of, you know, sort of slip of the, you know, misunderstanding things. I tend to mishear conversations, misunderstand people. It's interesting because my 10-year-old daughter is following in my footsteps of really like not getting things, but then creating something pretty amazing out of it. So, and I've recognized a lot of me in her actually now. Yeah. I mean, in a way, that's kind of a, well, wow, that's I do that. A good friend of mine said to me once, which I had no idea. He just said, I think differently. He said, he always asked me questions, not about music, just about life. You know, we'll talk about things. Sure. And he just says, you'll say something that nobody else will think of, you know, and obviously I'm not aware of that when I'm doing it. I'm just thinking, well, you probably heard this one before, but why have you thought of trying this, you know? And they'll be like, what? You know. So I think that probably comes out in the lyrics, and I suppose it enables me to create a space where we talked about psychedelia earlier. I think what gravitated me towards psychedelia was actually not initially the music at first. It was the sort of Edward Lear, you know, kind of nonsensicalness sometimes of the lyrics, you know, and it just sort of created. I was able to create even more stories from it. So I've sort of lived in that space from a lyrical point of view, and what I do tend to do is, if I do say something or think something, I'll put it down. It used to be I've got them here. These are diaries and lyric books. Wow. That's 1999. That's 98. That's 2000. And I would put them down. But then what I would do is then on a sort of early morning, clear head day, I would then read them down. And sometimes you would find that they would make a story in themselves, even though I've said them, I've thought them at different times. A story which often makes people chuckle is I love running. I've always loved running, very similar to the Ronnie O'Sullivan book. Completely identify with Ronnie in that I find it's just it's like a church. It's like I can just get out, and there's something to do with the pace of running and cycling. Actually, a sort of mechanical movement and a repetitive movement, and that puts me into a place where I can write. Now, in the old days before mobile phones, I used to carry a bag of 2p's and then 10p's around with me, which would look quite weird. And when I would come up with an idea for a song, I'd run to the nearest telephone box and I would go, and then I would phone up my answer machine
Wow.
and sing the idea of the song, and then I'd carry on running, and then oh my god, I've got another idea. Oh no, this could be the chorus. Going, don't forget it. Put the money in, and then sing the next bit. And then when I get home, I'd have a sort of written song
Amazing.
between the beats.
Because I suppose jogging with a bag of money is probably extra weight to carry anyway.
You'll never see the stars if you don't go out at night. You'll never feel your heart until it's broken twice. You'll never feel alive until you felt the cold. I'm walking till I found my soul.
But I mean, you've got the big songs like Suited and Booted, and it's kind of like the high kicks and the wink and the very theatrical stuff. But the melancholy songs that you write, for me personally, like You Can't Uneat the Apple, things like that. I mean, there's songs that just break your heart that are just brilliant.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I've always been very nervous about writing those because, I mean, we obviously all have that in us, melancholy. Yeah, I mean, it's those songs, I think, are the songs that you feel like you have to write. So, I mean, I've just described, sort of the mechanics of it, but sometimes it's there, I mean, any songs like Claret, You Can't Uneat the Apple, No Filter, which is a recent song which I'm incredibly proud of, which I wrote about my wife. These songs were written as long as you hear them. So if the song is 3.5 minutes, it was written in that time. So there are moments, golden, beautiful moments where you have to tell someone, you have to, like literally leave the dinner table and walk away without saying anything, grab a guitar, be incredibly rude, and then just let it happen. And I do honestly believe that those moments do come less frequent as you get older. I really believe that. I think that, often, I'm sure you boys talk a lot about bands that are still able to, cut it. And stuff like that, and what was their golden period, and is that is 28 the sort of perfect age, and but they are still there, and we still feel, and we still emote. But maybe we have too much knowledge as we get older to be able to just lay those truths out on the line, and something like You Can't Uneat the Apple, which is it's actually a line from the Old Testament. I always remember thinking the word uneat was a strange, I couldn't imagine that was even a word, And I remember going through a phase of having a copy of the Old Testament just because it's got great stories in it, for stealing, for songwriting, like Paradise Lost, basically. That in the Old Testament, you've got the whole of the post-punk movement, and I just remember, that one in particular was for my ex-girlfriend at the time. We split up. She decided to call it a day. It was her decision. And I thought, rather than write, a bitchy hate song, like I've written a lot of those, like If You Can't Live Without Me, Then Why Aren't You Dead Yet? But I think that, with that particular song, it was a moment to say, actually, thanks for the times that we had, and trying to be honorable and sort of pragmatic about it. So it's a strange song, that song, because it's a breakup song, but there must be at least a dozen My Life Story fans that have had that played at their wedding right at the beginning of their journey.
For leading me,
Mate, and look, Joined Up Talking, reissued end of this month, fantastic. 25 years after its original release,
Mm.
great album. We're really excited. Pre-ordered, done. But whose idea? How did it all come about to bring it on vinyl and re-celebrate it?
Yeah, so the year 2000, I did a very cursory bit of research and found out that was the sort of the trough of vinyl sales. So I think you'd be hard pressed to find, if there is vinyl released around that time, they'd probably be worth a few quid because they wouldn't have pressed too many up of acts that came out in the year 2000. We didn't do a vinyl edition of that, so that was always the driver behind doing this 25th anniversary release. So that's exciting. It's our third album, and I think that I don't know whether this is something that you both talk about, but I always really take a keen eye on any band's third album. I think that's the point where the first album, you're young and you don't really know what you're doing, you're learning. The second album, you maybe don't have the songs because you've had to put one out fairly quickly. Third album is when you've got the time to really think about, you understand the music industry, you hopefully understand your fans, and you understand how to write. And we produced it ourselves with the help of a few people, but we primarily was ourselves producing. And I'm really proud of the songs on it. I think it's the strongest album of songwriting from the first three albums. And yes, as we said earlier, there's not so much orchestration on it. It was much more of a focus on, if Mornington Crescent and the Golden Mile were in some ways looking back at British music and being, maybe, if you want to call it, part of that Britpop scene, definitely a nostalgic element to those albums. Join Up Talking is the opposite to that. It's the antithesis. It's the idea. The idea was to write something that sounded like the year 2000. We knew when it was going to come out, so we started writing in 1998, and I was already thinking about ideas about, you're both of the same age like me, where you would have bought 2000 AD, the comic. I remember buying 2000 AD in the 1980s, thinking in 20 years' time there's going to be robots and flying saucers everywhere. It's quite an honor being one of the very few acts that put an album out in that very groundbreaking year. You remember, there was the dot-com boom, of course. We just had Columbine, which was one of the beginning of all these horrific events that we now see copycats of. And of course, there was the sort of year 2K bug, which people thought that everything was going to stop at midnight and everything was going to shut down. There was a lot of anticipation, nerves, and excitement. It was an interesting year. So to put an album out then, we wanted to do everything from the sleeve to the production. We wanted to capture something that was not futuristic, but of the time, which in of itself sounds futuristic because it's the year 2000.
Talking of songs, I've got to say, Join Up Talking has probably got one of the greatest opening salvo of 4 songs of any albums around that time. You've got Empire Lion, If You Can't Live Me, Why Aren't You Dead Yet? It's a Girl Thing, and Sunday Tongue. What a great 4 songs to start.
Saturday was a night to remember. All today, not that you remember it anyway. You'll never, ever, ever do that again. Till next week anyway. Now the party's over.
Join Up Talking's coming out. You got an expanded version with B-sides and that on there. Was you able to acquire the original tapes and go back to the original tapes and do it from the ground up, or how did it all happen?
Yeah, I've got to thank my very good friend Phil Barton here. Phil is the owner of Sister Ray Records in Berwick Street, so the second biggest independent record store in the UK after Rough Trade. And Phil was my A&R man during our times with Andrew Lloyd Webber's label. I was trying to get the master tapes, and it was proving hard to get hold of them. And then I remembered that Phil had given me, oh my God, at least a decade ago, had given me a little box of CDs, sort of CDRs, kind of, I've got can see I've got a DAT, this is a DAT player here.
Wow.
But he just gave me some old. These are the DATs. These are all the old. So these were the unmastered version. So there's demos. There's but the most important thing was the unmastered version of the album. I was so pleased to get it, and because it was on DAT, I was just thinking, oh my god, so I bought that DAT machine off eBay. And I don't think I'm so nervous because I mean, this is the only, this is it, this has got to work, and thankfully it did. So it's remastered and I've unearthed quite a lot of good stuff. I mean, I'm just looking over here because I've got, these are all sort of, CDRs with just odd notes written on them in really rushed, terrible handwriting. So I've been finding out all the demos and tying them in with these diaries that I showed you. And I've been running a Patreon campaign over the last year, which has led up to this release, which has been amazing. I didn't actually think it would be as successful as it is, but it's, I guess it's probably part of like the My Life Story DIY ethos. I've always been interested in that. I mean, if you can't live without me, then why aren't you dead yet? It's the first ever internet only single. So, yeah, this Patreon campaign's been great. So I've been sort of sending demos off to My Life Story aficionados every week and sharing them some of my diary notes. I mean, my diary notes are really funny because they'll have things like, call ants, call singing teacher, Dana, rehearsal 2 to 7, release internet single. There we are. That's what that actually says. 23rd of August, 1999. So that's the first internet single. And then on the 27th here, it says Reading Festival. And then it says meeting at really useful group. Cut your nails.
That's the contrast.
I think it's because of the winkle pickers. You don't want to have long toenails in winkle pickers.
God,
it kills.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's good you got a DAT machine. It's good you got a DAT machine. I mean, we've got loads of DAT tapes. We've got nothing to do with them.
Oh well, once I've finished with this, you're welcome to have this because it's I mean, once I've converted them digitally, it's not needed anymore.
Who cares? Flesh is always weaker when she turns to black and blue. Emerald green, you know it's true. Emerald green, when I love you more. Emerald green, what I do.
Your last two albums, World Citizen and this, I've got to tell you, this blew our socks off. I mean, it appeared in our Albums of the Year show in 2024. It's all every track on that. There's no filler on that as the last two albums, and in fact, every album you've done. But is there any new stuff in the works for you, Jake?
Yeah. I've written two new songs. One which has got the most My Life Story lyric you could ever imagine, which is called "Sour Grapes Make Cheap Wine." So I've got that one. I'm just really deciding on what to do in terms of the sound of the record. So yeah, 2 or 3 songs are written, but the plan is that over the Christmas period into New Year, I'll write that. Yeah, I mean, the last album. I'm immensely proud of that record.
Fantastic.
It's not like it's harder to write as you get older, but I think you just appreciate, if you. When people say, those songs on there are really good, that you can't say any more than that, really. So, and actually the production, I mean, we recorded that in our studio, me and Nick Evans, my co-writer. And, but yeah, Ben Hillier made it's quite an interesting album because Ben Hillier produced 2 Depeche Mode albums. And he's not too far. He's in another village that's sort of around the Brighton area. He's got a studio, and so I kind of, in the back of my mind, I thought, "Oh, this is going to be good. He'll make it sort of quite polished and Depeche Mode-y, And then as soon as he heard the tracks, he said, right, no, we're going full on new wave. We're going to make this sound as live as we can. And it's got a fantastic sound to it. It's really sort of bouncy and, yeah, very pleased with it.
Heart flutters when I try to sing your song. Running out of time. Can't hold on to what is mine. The senses are deceiving me. It's a 999 emergency. Don't know if I still believe in what
You touched on the internet single. You had the Exileinside project that went on in the 2000s, which was very ahead of its time. I mean, it was a very cottage industry thing where you'd realised that the industry had changed and there was going to be other ways of doing it for the artist and label and everything. You came up with that concept seemingly ahead of most people, really. I mean,
Yeah.
how did that come about?
I think it came from, so when we released If You Can't Live Without Me as an internet only single, I'll never forget Steve Lamacq played it on the usual show, and then he said, "You're not gonna believe this, but you can't buy it in the shops. You have to go to www.mylifestory.band or whatever it was, or .co.uk." When I saw the power of all these email addresses coming in, which of the time were things like at Clarinet and FreeServe and that era, and I think when I saw that, and when I saw what we'd done with Parlophone, I mean, we didn't quite spend £1 million with Parlophone over 18 months. It was about £900,000. That's an incredible amount of money. We were making videos at £80,000 a video. A 2 up, 2 down house in Brighton was £80,000 in 1997.
Wow.
So it was a house per video. So I could have bought a whole corner of the Monopoly board instead of doing videos. So when I saw the swing of what that could do, and we talked a bit about the sort of year 2000 and the sort of internet the .com boom and things, it was really obvious to me as a fan, as someone who was I was fan club members for bands. I was a member of the Prisoner fan club. I had my number 6 badge and things like that. I just realized that this could be, as I grow older, this could be a way of sustaining my career, because My Life Story was an expensive project. So Exileinside was coming out of Joined Up Talking and thinking, let's get this hunker down even further, record everything at home. Owl City, Firefly, I think, was a #1, and it was recorded in a bedroom. And I think it was the first time, these things were happening. Again, being the son of 2 artists, I was brought up, I know a little bit about my art history. I know a lot about the benefactors and philanthropists around, throughout the different art movements. The fact that, even people like Salvador Dali, they had benefactors and people that would pay for them in their early careers to, would buy their early work to keep them alive. And I thought, I'm just going to copy that art model. I'm an artist, So I had investor angels. I had 13 investor angels that all invested £500. And then I collected that money and I used that money as an advance, and I reported back to those 13 investors as if they were a record label or an A&R team. Hence, that's why I really like the Patreon, because Patreon has sort of taken that idea much further. Yeah. And it's a brilliant platform for people like me to work on, because I think I just like dealing with a small group of people. It suits me. It suits my personality a bit more. I really like listening to what other people have got to say about art and creativity, even if they're not creative themselves. In a way, that's almost a benefit. So those 2 Exileinside albums are worth having a look at. I'm certainly thinking about revitalizing those at some later stage as well, because they've gone under the radar. I think I need to somehow tie them into My Life Story, so that when people are looking for them online, they look for My Life Story and they can see Exileinside. But, that's 2 whole albums there of pretty strong material. So the song Katrin on the first Exileinside album, that's the one that's got Adele singing on it.
Wow.
Right, okay. I didn't realise that.
Yeah, that's her first recording.
Wow. mate, look, we saw you just when we met you at the Chinneries in Southend. What a night! You were fantastic that night, really was. And I see you guys are touring again it's this month, isn't it? You kick off.
Yeah, we're playing Shine next weekend, and then up in Minehead, and then it's our own tour, 5th and 6th, 11th and 12th, I think, of December. Just a short tour, but that's where we'll be doing Join Up Talking in full, and you can get all the information from our website.
A couple of quick fun questions, and I think you've answered one of them already, but what would be your desert island disc?
Actually, my favourite record of all time, as in a single, is a song called "The Moon's a Harsh Mistress" by Jimmy Webb. It was for about 2 decades Wichita Lineman, which incredibly is so many people's favourite ever record of all time. Particularly as it's a song about a man putting telephone wires up across the desert. For somebody from Essex to relate to that, God knows how that happened. But Jimmy Webb to me is an incredible songwriter. If you don't know too much about Jimmy Webb, try not to listen to anything that. I mean, he was famous for writing for Glenn Campbell, but he wrote for a lot of other artists as well, Roberta Flack, people like that. He's not the greatest singer in the world, and I think that he sort of farms his songs out to these incredible performers. But it's how he sings his own songs, the emotion he puts into them. For a man of that era, that sort of baby boomer era, I suppose, there's just something really cuts right through into your heart. And although Wichita Lineman is still an incredible song, I came across The Moon's a Harsh Mistress, and just listen to it. It'll take you to another place. It's heavenly.
And final question, mate. Table for 4, dead or alive. Who are your 3 guests that join you?
Table for 4, dead or alive. Okay, so I'm going to throw in a controversial one just because, to start with, because I got to work with him and he is a hero of mine, and that's Morrissey. So I'm going to start with Morrissey purely because I'd really love to meet him again now and just see what's going on. I'd like to have a discussion with him because he's quite different when you meet him in real life. My last 3 were on the album Southpaw Grammar. And we contributed to a couple of tracks. That Boxers was one of them, I think. Yeah, so I definitely have him in. Because I just don't get it. Yeah, I can't work him out at the moment. So we'll put him in there. So that'll already get things going, won't it?
Totally.
Dead or alive? Oh my God. I really love an author and a book that I was obsessed with when I was a kid. Luke Reinhardt wrote a book called The Dice Man, which is about using the random throw of a dice to generate a kind of an alternative life. So you have to your religion is the dice. So whatever decision you make, you have to obey the dice, but essentially you are still obeying your own parameters of what you could do because you're putting the 6 choices down in there. So I've always wanted to meet him because I've found his books, The Dice Man and The Life of Wim, really interesting. So that's 2. I've got 1 more. Let's do somebody really. It's going to be John Lennon, I think. We're going to stick John Lennon in there.
With that, buddy.
For obvious reasons. Yeah.
Jake, thanks for your time. It's been absolutely amazing. Love talking to you. Very, very interesting. We're loving your new stuff, but we're also thrilled that you're bringing out Joined Up Talking for the first time on vinyl. It's got so many great tracks on that. We wish you all the best. Not that you need it, because your output is amazing. But thanks for giving up your time this morning. It's been amazing for us. Big thrill. Thank you to Natasha as well for helping organise this, and we look forward to seeing you sometime soon on the tour.
Thanks very much, Mark. Thank you, Andy. Happy birthday, Mark, for a few weeks' time. See you later.
Thanks, mate. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks, mate.
All the boys, all the children